press record. Yes, JavaScript functions, we're back. All right. Right, functions. If you have a background in strongly typed languages, these may be, you may know these as methods, right? In object-oriented languages, we have something concept called method or functions, however you want to call it. JavaScript has functions because it's not really truly an object-oriented language. So we have a functional storage unit that could be reused. So when we want to declare a function, so let me just step back. Functions allow you to package up lines of code that you can use and often reuse in your programs. So reusability, that's the main thing. Sometimes they take parameters like the pizza button, and then we have a concept of reheat pizza. So you could, when we get into using the UI a little bit better in full stack 2, we're going to learn about web APIs and how we connect the buttons up to calling our functions. So right now we've been just hitting page reload, and if that's kind of a clunky process for you, it's good that you understand the fact that it's a little bit painful, because we don't want to be refreshing our browser just to trigger this stuff. We would like to have page load with input, different mechanisms we could trigger things, right? Based on an event, so concept of an event such as like a click event, and we need a way to put those events on some of the input controls, and then we need to trigger something called functions. So, but that's getting a few steps ahead. We haven't got there yet, but that's the big picture. The big picture, right? If you think about that picture, if you have a music search thing like we have in our assignment, or even something as simple as a calculator, you would want something that you could trigger those calls from that click, right? Click search, there needs to be some way of initiating the sequence. For right now, though, we are just initiating the sequence via the browser reload. The browser will reload, and then it will read the script, and then it will try to run through and execute all of that. So anyhow, this is how you would declare a function. You have a special keyword in the language called function that has a name, and then you can have a parameter. This is a very simple one. It's a function that's named reheat pizza, and if you notice, there's camel casing going on here. So there is not a capital R, it's lowercase, and then the next word is capital P, and then it has a parameter. So that could very well be input, but it's really good to name your variables and your functions in a way that is very self-explanatory when you look at it. So when I look at this, I say, okay, well, this function has something to do with reheating pizza. I mean, not in the literal sense, but there's a number of slices, and I figure out it's going to do something in there. So if you had something called function reverse string, that gives me some type of indication that there's some type of string traversal going on there. All right, so then we can also have, okay, well, let's just look at some code then quickly. All right, so in my REPL. All right, so I have a quick little hello world kind of app here. And it just basically will console log hello world. If I go to run this now, it won't run. If I look at the console log, if there's any errors, remember we can do either developer tools. Let's see if this will give us what we wanted here. Did something. Whether or not it's doing a bunch of weird stuff. Okay, well, that's their page. Okay, so there is something called, well, first of all, it is not going to call because you need to do something called an invocation. You need to actually trigger it. So what you can do in your code is you need to call it. Otherwise, it doesn't know. It's just sitting there in memory, waiting for somebody to trigger it, right? You know, it's standing against the wall, waiting to be asked to dance, kind of thing, right? It won't. It will not invoke itself a function like this. There are functions that do invoke themselves, but in order for you to invoke it, and plus, I don't like it. It's not camel case, so I make it camel case. Then somewhere down my script, doesn't matter where, I can actually call it in this way. Right, so if I run it, it should console log. If it doesn't, we will actually trigger it another. So there it was right there. Hello world. But what's really cool about it is now that it's in memory, now that it is in this window, this browser memory, the browser knows about this script. I can actually call it from here. Right? I can actually call it. Should be able to call it show, unless this is preventing me from doing it. So maybe it's not letting me do it, show message. Okay, so maybe they got some other stuff going on, but normally you can actually trigger it from here. I'll show you an example with my own. Right, and there's also a concept of alerts. So we worked with window.prompt, right? Another built-in mechanism is something called alert. So you can actually, instead of using the console, maybe you don't want to use that console, you can actually trigger an alert, and it should work. Now it doesn't. There it is right there. So you can trigger, the browser knows I can actually trigger this thing, and maybe it's going to want to run many times. I could have many alerts and really, really annoy the user, right? I could have all these and like really kind of create a really bad user experience. If you've ever been to a site where they're triggering all these things and you can't close them, right? Maybe they're doing something like that. But anyhow, the name at the end of the day is this is one function here, and I've basically I've named it with the function keyword and declaration, and then I actually have a name, and there is no parameters in here. It's an empty parameter. It has something in it. It's not much logic, but then the main thing is I invoke it. If I don't invoke it at all, then it's not going to run for me, right? It doesn't run. So that's what a function with no parameters looks like. Sometimes you want multiple parameters. Sometimes you want even one parameter. Like we at this point we had this concept of no parameters. These parentheses are empty, as we did. This one's a say hello function. It has a message, as you can tell. It has a variable keyword. The message is a storage container. We're putting the string in there, and then we're console logging it. We need to invoke it. But if we needed multiple parameters, we would have to separate them by commas. So if you look at a double greeting here, we have a way to pass in not only one, but two names. So it would automatically do the assignment. And again, in JavaScript, you don't have to, in many other languages, you have to actually explicitly state what these parameters are ahead of time. But in JavaScript, because we have that type coercion going on, it'll try to figure things out. It'll basically take whatever you pass it, really. And then you have to do a whole bunch of checks, right? Those truthy, falsy checks, which can be a pain, to be honest, but it is what it is. So you can also have functions that don't have any parameters. Like we said, you just package up some code, perform some task. In this case, you would leave the parentheses empty. Take, for example, this simple hello that prints hello. Right, so if we went back to our example here, where was it here? Oh my God, where was it? Right here. Let's move this over here. We have this hello. We could then actually have another function called greeting, right? Greeting, and it takes a message as a parameter, but again, we need to invoke this one, so we can just actually message out the alert, the message, right? We can invoke this first one, and then we can invoke. Okay, we can actually say alert hello from greetings, from greeting. right? And then we're just going to output that message. So I could actually call it now, greeting, hey yo, right? And then I can run that. First one should run, hello world, that's the first invocation. And then the next one should actually say, okay, now I'm calling from inside of the second one, and it should pass in, hey yo, which is great. So now what's great about that is now we have this concept here where we can actually, we can reuse this now, right? We can actually, spelling, that's French for hello. I'm sorry, I don't know too many other, I probably do, I'm just on the fly here. So I run this, now I can reuse it a second time, right? Hello from greeting, hey yo, and then it didn't call again. Why didn't it call? So maybe it executed out. But you could call it again in your code base. Let's see, hello world.
Greeting, you spelled it correctly.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Good eye. Yes, see? If you don't name it properly, it doesn't know what to do. That's a good eye. See, I quickly typed it really fast. So then I try to execute something. It'd probably give me a console log error if I looked in there. So let's look, right? If I clear my console, I run that, it probably will give me some message eventually that there was one error. And the one error was greeting is not defined. So use your console window. It'll give you some information of what's going on. So right, that's right. So I easily misspelled that one. So if you misspell it, it won't know what, it'll go and look up in the scope and try to find the wrong name, and then it won't find it and it'll throw an error. So this one should run hello world, hello from greeting, first one, hello world. So now I've called it twice. So I have a little bit of reusability now. Now I could use that. Now this is it's a very simple example, right? So if we wanted to then pass in two messages, right? So now we can have multiple parameters and we can have as many as we want. Message 2. So now we could actually pass in message 2, right? Message 2. Now, what happens now? Let's see. Let's see if it'll fail or if it'll actually, I believe it may not fail. Let's see. It says hello world, hello, hey yo, undefined. So there's that undefined that we talked about. Because there is no presence of a value, it's still going to run, but there's no value in there. Bonjour. So we don't really want that. Eventually we would have to like handle those cases, but for now we will, we'll just put in a second greeting, second hello, right? And a second right? So if I run that, hello, second hello, second bonjour. So we have some reusability. We have a way of providing an extra parameters here. Now, what I was talking about before in other languages is you would have to actually explicitly cast these. You would say that this message is a bool, and this message is going to be a string, and I have another parameter that is maybe like a list or something like that, or some other, whatever. It could be int, a nullable integer that is, number. So, number, right? So if this method in another strongly typed language, you pass in anything here, it'll blow up right away. It'll throw an exception, which we haven't talked about exceptions, but how great is that in terms of programming? You would know right away. Whereas here we already established that it can basically do some type coercion and just kind of change it up on us. It would kind of think it would a string. It'll basically kind of try to convert it down or try to convert it to its truthy value if you did a condition against it, right? So there's no mechanism at this point when we're learning that's going to actually enforce those types. So that's a quick little couple functions there we wrote. And the pattern is kind of the same as we keep going through it. So we have also a concept of a return statement. So sometimes you may want to return a value. I'll get to that in a second. So in the hello function that we had previously seen. A value is printed to the console, but it's not explicitly returned in a return statement. You can write a return statement by using the return, this return keyword here. So if we trigger this, we have this container called say hello. There's a message in there and we return it because maybe maybe it's not good enough that a function just console logs, because think about it. If you have a calculation function, what good is it if the value stays encapsulated in console log? It has no purpose. Doesn't serve any purpose in a calculation. We want, say we have a, some type of tax calculator or something that takes two values and multiplies them together. We need to know what that value is. That's the whole point. It's its purpose. Its purpose is to provide that calculation for us. There's no benefit in a function just suppressing its value to the console log, because to be honest, nobody really, aside from developers, nobody really looks at the console log, right? It's just us. So let me get out of here, okay? Right, so in our, some of these are great because they're just string messages, but you might have, you might have something else in here where, we have a function that is, I don't know, calculate tax. You pass it an amount or subtotal, and we need it to do something, right? So, because it may depend on something. We might have an amount, I don't know, subtotal. We might have the high tax here in Canada, which is like 13% on items. 13%. Yes, 13% taxes on items that you buy. Okay, so then, right, if we console log this right here, then this is basically, this is what good is it to us if we were actually depending on that. I mean, it's all well and good if we're just invoking it in this way, calculate tax. Okay, I'm going to give it a, $1,000 item, right? And then we're going to calculate the tax. Run it in our console. Oh, sorry. Somewhere in there, then I got to trigger it again. Oh, where is it here? Info. There, $130. $130 in tax. Imagine that. Sucks. Right, so if we wanted something else, if we wanted to do something with that, maybe we wanted to, maybe we had another total that was equal to, $500 plus, sorry, the original amount, which was $1,000, plus calculate the tax on it, $1,000, right? If we run this, it's not going to really help us out. In fact, it probably might not do anything for us. Let's see what it does here. It just console logs this $130, but then it doesn't actually, if we were actually to console log this total, what would happen here? Total. What would be the result of that? NaN, N-A-N, not a number, because of course we are trying to, we're basically invoking this function with $1,000. It's suppressing the subtotal, and then it's returning undefined or nothing. It's not returning anything. And then we're trying to basically add 1,000 plus nothing, whether it be null or whether it be undefined. And then of course it's going to give us some value that's not a number. So to solve this, I mean, we can keep the console log in there if we wanted to, but to solve it, we need to return that value with that return keyword. So return the subtotal. Now if we run it, it should give us the actual amount. So $1,000 we have in Canada, $130 in taxes, and then the total amount is $1,130 on a flat screen TV or something like that. I don't know. Right, so I don't like this really, to be honest. If you notice in your coding and you notice yourself doing things more than twice or three times, there's like a rule of three. So if I see this 1,000 floating around, I might as well just make a variable for it. So I'm just going to call it And I could use constant. We haven't learned that one. We haven't learned that yet, but I'll just use var for now. I'll just say, you know, amount is equal to 1,000. So then I don't have to keep repeating myself in my code. I can just write it in this way. For me, that's a lot cleaner because I know what that 1,000 is. It's an amount. I'm calculating the amount to get a total. And then therefore I am console logging that total. But I am invoking it in this way, right? I'm calling the function name. I'm passing it a parameter. And then because of that return statement, it's going to evaluate this expression. It's going to evaluate this. It's going to execute this block. It's going to figure out, in this case, 1,000 will be calculated, will be 130. So it'll basically be like this, 1,000 plus 130. And then the total will equal to 1130. And that's how that's being executed there. So we kind of created a nice little function that now we can use all around our application to calculate tax. As you see the reusability of this, you will see, one day I'll show you the code base I work in, and you will see things that'll make your eyes water. And it's all functions. Yes, so get used to them. So that's a return statement. So it returns the value instead of printing it. Yes, because we don't want it printed unless we're going to console log something for our development. We want it returned, returning a value. So we already talked about this, how to run the function. So in order to get your function to do something, we need to invoke it or call it. Maybe you can just say call it. I'm calling the function if invoke is a big word for you or you're not sure what invoke means, invocation. If that's, you want to get technical. Otherwise, you can just say I'm calling my function. I'm going to call it. I'm going to basically trigger it, call the function by using its function name, followed by parentheses with any arguments that are passed into it. Functions are like machines. You can build the machine, but it won't do anything unless you turn it on. That's a good analogy. You can build it, but you need to turn it on. You need to trigger it. So here's how we trigger this function, say hello. Same deal. So this is basically not triggering it. It's just printing it. We need to actually invoke it. So I already showed you how to invoke it. So sorry, in here, we are console logging the result of it, but we're invoking it in the inside of that console log. And sometimes when I see that, I don't know about you, but for me, I don't really like that, to be honest. If I have I don't like to see this kind of thing going on. Take this whole value here and put it inside of there put it inside of the output to be invoked before it gets console logged. I don't really like that because it gets really convoluted sometimes. When we get into the concept of, you know, how we step through this code, sometimes it's good to figure out what exactly this was before it was printed out. Sometimes we might want to handle this, right? In the case that we have a conditional where, you know, geez, you know, was less than 0. If the total is less than 0, it's a negative number. Maybe I just want to, you know, maybe I want to go I want to go trigger something else. I want to, you know, throw something called throw an error. Otherwise, if it is a positive number, then why not? We will just console log it, right? So there's those checks that you can do. As you get into logic, you're going to find yourself using conditionals, calling functions. This is where your logic is all baked in. You have to think about many different scenarios. Today, I hurt my brain struggling for 3 hours on some logic, like, you know, very in-depth logic. And it still ended up, wasn't a function. It was a conditional, but it was trying to get all the pieces working together in the right way. And then there's many scenarios that once I deliver my code, it goes down the pipeline, and we have the concept of a quality analysis person who tests their code, and they do through different test cases. So you may think, oh, my bug is fixed, but then they break it somehow, and they break it. It passes 9 out of 10 test cases, and there's one scenario that you missed, and then you have to circle back and try to fix the one scenario without breaking the other 9 scenarios. and it gets very interesting sometimes. All right, so we're on number 7 here. So right, so I don't like that. I don't like invoking it on the inside. Nothing wrong with that, but I sometimes like to see what the return message value was. So parameters versus arguments can be tricky at first to know when something is either a parameter or an argument. Yes, these names are very interchanged a lot. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about these. The key difference is where they show up in the code. A parameter is always going to be a variable name that appears in the function declaration. Take that in. A parameter, yes, a param also in strongly typed languages, yes, it's a parameter inside of a method call. Okay, on the other hand, an argument is going to be a value or any type of JavaScript data types, a number, string, or Boolean, and will always appear in the code when the function is called or invoked. An argument is always going to be a value, any of the JavaScript types, and will always appear in code when the function is called or invoked. Right, so what that means now, to take that in. Okay. Right, so this would be something, this would be a parameter, would be amount, but amount changes all the time. So we could have something that would be an argument inside of calc that might be something like GST, oh, that's not right, but if it was something like zero, GST, HST, those are the taxes, 0.13. So now this is something that doesn't change much, and it's inside of the function. It's an argument of the function, whereas this parameter is always changing at runtime, right? When we're invoking it in that way. And let's see if I get my terminologies right, because you know what, I interchange these so much, to be honest. All right, function recap. So functions are packages, a way that you package up your code. You can easily use and reuse a block of code. Parameters are the variables that are used to store the data that's passed into a function for the function to use. Arguments are the actual data that's passed into a function when it's invoked. Sorry, you know what? See, I already messed that up in my mind already. Parameter is amounts. Yes, parameter is amounts. Whatever we pass in this is the argument. So if this can be 5,000, it can be 1, it can be 200, it can be whatever, -1. That's the argument. Yes. What I was thinking about here was something called a local variable. A local variable and a parameter. Local variable, parameter, there's a concept of global variables. Yes, so these get interchanged a lot in your head. So when the function is declaration, these are parameters. When it is called, these are the arguments for the call, because they change. Confused? Yes, you could be. Some people just write code. They don't really, they just, sometimes they lose track of these terminologies, right? Because you don't have time sometimes when you're working to really sit back and say, what am I going to call this thing? I'm just going to make it work, right? Okay, we'll look at that in a second. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, I still got confused. Can you just repeat again? With the practical again.
Yes. Okay, so let's look at this for a second here. A parameter is this function declaration. So calculate tax amount. It could be, let's just look at this. We'll start again. Function, hello world. We have no parameters right now, and it's just going to console log hello. At this point in time, our function has no parameters, right? If we give it a message parameter, that is a message parameter that's in the declaration of the function. An argument is something when we invoke the function with 1,000, it can change, it can be, okay, 1,000 can be an argument. When we invoke it, the argument could be 2,500, right? Hello world with 500. So this is the parameter, sorry, this is the parameter that is for the function declaration, and then these are the arguments for the call that you use to invoke the function. Does that make sense? That's referencing how you call it and what value you pass into it.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, these terminologies, you know, to be honest, when you're writing code, you're just like, I don't know, I'm calling the function with this value. I just know I can do it. But if you look at the definition of that, is what they're trying to get at. So function recaps. Parameters are variables you use to store the data that's passed into a function for the function use. Arguments are the actual data that's passed in the function when it is invoked, at the time of invocation. Function body is enclosed inside of curly brackets, right? So this is our declaration. We have multiple parameters. We have an X parameter, we have a Y parameter, and this is the function body. So if we go back to my code here, we were doing, previously, we were having to set up our data types, right? Message would equal something, right? We would have to line up our number would equal to 5, right? So this was static. And when we put these named parameters in there, at the time of invocation with these arguments, at the time of that invocation, it'll go and do this assignment for you. So it automatically and behind the scenes will say 1000, it'll compile that, it'll evaluate the expression so that message equals 1000. So we don't, or empty string, what have you. We don't need this assignment anymore because it's taken care of when it gets passed into this. Automatically, it goes into that storage in memory. Same with this number here. It goes into this storage space. So when we actually go to when we actually go to use it, you know, whether it be alert, number, or what have you, we already know that there's a value. When it's triggered, it has, with an argument, it has an assignment to it, and then I have a value to it. Ideally, I mean, as we noticed, it could be undefined as well. In some cases where if somebody doesn't pass it, right, you only pass 1000, it would look at the declaration and say, okay, this number here, this argument must match up with this first parameter, therefore I'm going to store it in there. I don't have a value for this, so I'm going to put in undefined, right? At that point in time, I'm going to put undefined for this, right? So this could be 1000 is undefined. I could also pass in hello world. I actually probably, you know, 55, the assignment will be 44, 55. All right, let's run it. Undefined, right? It can't find that number, 55, right? So it'll actually do that. So if you see that it tried to output an undefined, then it tried to, then it found it because 55 was right there, so it knows the assignment was there. So I mean, really the truth test would be alert the first message. So we should expect to do 1000 and undefined. So if we run it, it says 1000, it says undefined. The second one should say 44 and then 55. Okay. So it figured out what we were trying to do here. It didn't stop us from doing this. However, would it stop it? Could we just call it like this with nothing? Let's see. The first one would be 1000 and undefined. Second call, invocation would be 44 and 55. And it doesn't call it. So let's see, it may have actually given us some, oh, I misspelled it again. Huh, right? I missed an L. There you go. You need to make sure that if you're calling something, you call it by the right name. Right. Undefined and undefined. Yes, because it allowed it to call it, but it passed nothing in. So then therefore these two values, these parameters, they don't know what you want to do with them, so therefore they have no value. They're falsy. If you were to actually check, if you were to actually check the value of one of those, right, like this, it would, you know, that would be true only if it was a value, and then otherwise it would be falsy, right? So we would actually, let's try it out. This is going back to last class when we had falsy and truthy. All right, let's make it a little bit simpler here. We'll give it, we'll just give it one parameter. We invoke it with nothing, and maybe at the end we invoke it with null, right? We could invoke it with hello world, could be invoked with false. I'm going back to this to confuse you. All right, so we have 1,000. It should run and say it's truthy because 1,000 is actually a value in that cohort, in that that truthy falsy evaluation that we looked at. Then we would expect undefined would be falsy. Then null would be falsy, and then false would be falsy, right? So anyhow, I'm just messing with you here if you don't understand it. Yes, so this is a conditional block. You can already tell now we have a bit of some logic here, something we haven't done before. We're adding conditional statements. So instead of all these statements floating around somewhere in your script, you can build this out, write it once and reuse it, hopefully many times. Right, so that's the function body enclosed inside of our handlebar mustaches, our braces, and then, but if we have one brace, we need to close the other brace. Whatever is inside is called the body. Much like the HTML document had the document body, we have a functional body. So here's a little bit more here, just more comments here. X and Y are parameters in this declaration. Function body. Here we have a sum. The sum is a, so yes, this, when we get into scope, we're going to talk about scope, but this value here is within this function, right? Defined within the function, they're called, it's local to the function, right? And then we return it. It'd be hard to, you know, if you only had one, it'd be hard to access it from outside of it if you didn't call it. So 1 or 2 are passed into the function as arguments, and the result is returned and stored into a new variable called sum. So we have this new variable that is, you know, is the result of this expression, and then we return that. And then we actually have it defined in a variable that's outside of the function. You can do that, but it looks a little confusing to me, right? If you looked at that, you're like, oh well, I have it here, but then I also have it here. That doesn't make sense really, right? But it does when we start talking about scope. It'll make more sense to you. Right, so the function body is enclosed inside of curly brackets, functional body, and then this is how we do invocation or call. We're gonna pick up the telephone and we're gonna call this function called add, and we're gonna pass it in 1, 2, 3, and we should expect it to return 3. Sorry, pass it 1 and 2. If it does its job properly, it should return 3. Now remember, if it just console logs it and doesn't return it, it's suppressing it. And then in a calculation, it has no value to us because it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything for us. We need a value out of it in order for it to actually, and therefore we need it to return something in a return statement. So we can talk about return values. So it's important to understand that returning and printing are not the same thing. As we already talked about, printing a value to the console, JavaScript console only displays it for your viewing, for debugging purposes for the developer. But the value it displays can't be used after that, so it's kind of useless unless that's what you're going for. Unless your function does a side effect. Now, it doesn't always have to return something. It could do a side effect. It could trigger something. It could trigger something in the back-end server. It could trigger some kind of state change. It could do something as a side effect. It doesn't have to return it, but if you're using it in a way where you're expecting a result, console log is not going to help you out. So for this reason, you should remember that only console log is for your testing of the code. But after you've, to be honest, after you've determined that your code is working, unless you're trying to check for errors, sometimes it's best to clean up all your code and remove your logging. Because again, if you look at this, if you look at some websites and you see some of their code, it's not pretty. Somebody, world is misspelled. Yeah, my spelling, my spelling's bad. So I type so fast. So if you had multiple arguments, the print function would only show you one result. If you had multiple arguments, the print would only show you one result. I'm not sure on that one. What you mean in this one here? The print. So in this code piece, if I had multiple parameters, yes, it's only going to print out the one that I want it to print out. I only have logic based on input. I would have to add another console log to print out the second parameter. Otherwise, it's not going to know. It only looks at whatever evaluation you give it. If you don't tell this logical piece of code that I want to print out the second parameter, it won't do it for you. So you need to actually, if that's a requirement for your function, you need to figure out a way to output two parameters. Yes, that was what you have to do. So this one would say is working was called the functional call, and the argument was 3. It says it should say returns, I am returning this string. So yes, you pass in 3. Is this working? It prints out, this is what was passed, and then it returns back a string. I don't know what you would do with this string. Maybe it's just for, I don't know why you would do that, to be honest, but this is just showing an example of a return value. So using return values. So sometimes you want to return something. So returning a value from a function is great, but that's the use of the return value. If you're not going to use the value to do something, yeah, what's the point of returning something if you're not going to use it? Yeah, there's no point to that unless you're going to use the value returned from the function, then might as well just have it do a side effect then, or whatever else you would need it to do. Here's a very good example of something that you would want, was some kind of add calculation. So this would return the sum of 2 numbers, and it returns it in a nice way. This is what we want. We want something like this if we're using a calculation. So function return value can be stored in a variable or reused throughout your program as a functional argument. Right, so you can have, you can build this out really, right? You can have, function add 2 numbers, x and y. I want to return x plus y. Maybe I have something called subtract. Now these are very basic functions. As you can tell, I'm not really checking for anything. Subtract x, y. You might notice some of these function calls are they're case sensitive. So you may not be able to just, you may not invoke it if you misspell it. So then I have 2 here. So then I can actually do something with those. I can call them, right? I can call add x 5 plus 5. I would expect it to come back with 10. I can call subtract 100 from 10. I would expect it to be 90. I don't have any error checking here. If I actually gave it like empty string and a false, it'll probably blow up on me. At the same time, if I also pass in, null plus, null and null, it should actually blow up on me as well. I may. Let's see. Oh well, I have to actually console log it in this REPL. So what happened here? If I inspect this a little bit better, I have, where's my messages here? one error. Subtract. See, I type so fast. Subtract, 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 subtract. Right? At least it's telling me. At least it's telling me now. All right, to do something. Oh, lots of errors there. Info, one warning, no errors, 5 user messages. Where did my thing go? It doesn't like me today. Did it print anything out? No, it didn't like me. Why didn't it like me? Well, you know what? Maybe it's what's going on here. I can do it probably better inside of Visual Studio. Why not? This is a REPL that is giving me some. All right, so maybe let's just output it. Why not? Alert, because this is a web interface. We'll just alert it. Give it an alert. Sometimes it's best just to do it inside of Visual Studio, but I have this open. Alert. This value. Let's see what's going on. All right. Expect 10. 10. Okay. Expect 90. Yes. Okay. So that's that. So now we're getting into the other weird stuff. So it actually concatenated my 2 strings. That's weird. It did that. It didn't error out on me, right? It did the coercion and conversion, type conversion, and it converted those 2 strings and said, okay, we're just going to concatenate them. That's weird. 0. And okay, so then it said null plus null subtract null was 0. So it kind of converted it into some. It probably did a conversion inside of here where it converted it to 0 minus 0. Again, that was the weirdness that happens, right? In those weird cases. But if we look at that code now, we have 2 functions that can be reused, and outside of now, for our purposes, alert doesn't really help us because we can't actually do something like this where we said, you know, var total equals add 5 and 5 plus subtract 90 and a 10 and get that expression, because it's alert text boxes. It's not going to work. You know, if we try to alert, what would happen here now? If we try to alert the total, you know, that's going to give us some weirdness probably, right? Can't do that. So we'll just get rid of this, because now we're just invoking this call. And what's going to happen is these alerts are going to fire, and then it's going to give us probably undefined back, and then it's just going to alert something else. So it's going to give us 8. Okay, 8. It's giving us 80, but this is no return value for us. Then total is going to be not a number because it doesn't have a number. These are not numbers in that sense. So yes, return statements are better. So in this case, let's see if it'll work now. Return x plus y. Return x minus y. Will it give us a result now? It should actually give us something. So if we have, now it gives us 88. Thank God. So it did something for us. It evaluated 4 plus 4 to 8, and 90 minus 10 to 80, right? So we have 80 plus 8. 8 plus 80 equals 88. So we know that works. So that's, I mean, for a very simplistic test. Now we can try to break this as much as we want. We know we can break it, but for now in this example, that's good enough. All right. Take a break soon because it's getting heavy, but yes, we're kind of learning a lot here. So return values. So this is great. Like we said already, a function's return value can be stored inside a variable or reused throughout your program as a functional argument. So that means that, yeah, you can call it wherever you want. You can store it, the result in a variable, and use it. So if we wanted to, as we did already, we took the result of these functions and we stored it inside of a total. So now in our program, there is a variable called total that is the result of 2 function calls. We could also have another variable called sum, and then we have, 5, whatever the argument is, and we could also have a variable called difference, diff. That is these values here, right? And in our program now, we have these variables that are the result of those functional expressions, those function calls. But in the same time, we could call them inline, and we don't have to actually give the return value a variable. We don't have to store it if we didn't want to. We don't have to store this as a sum and difference, although it does make for good code clarity, because if I actually were to define these ahead of time, and then when I got down to this line, I could say, okay, the total is, what is this? What am I adding? I'm adding the sum plus the difference. I don't know of what, but if you had something like the total is the result of the subtotal, plus the taxes. Okay, well, that makes sense to me. What that calculation would mean to me is very clear that I'm trying to figure out and calculate a total. Here's how I went about getting it. I have a variable that's called subtotal. What does that look like? I have a variable called taxes. What does that look like? I kind of understand when I read this what's going on. So when you're planning your code, make sure you're very descriptive, because your code should read like a book to somebody who may not have, at least if they could look at the method names or the function names, they could kind of get an idea of what your code does. If you have a bunch of obscure messages, I don't know. We once had a contractor guy who was Russian. He wrote all his code in Russian. How in the world am I ever going to be able to debug that when he left? I had no idea what anything was doing, because it was all in a different language. So you have to be descriptive in what you're doing. For that guy, I guess it was really good job security, right? Because they probably had to call him back at some point. So, right. So that's a return value. Just same thing that we already talked about. You have a function called add, returns the sum of two numbers. You have another one called divide by 2. So that function gives me a very good explanation. If I pass it in a number, it's probably going to divide it by 2. I'm clear with that. I don't need to read the comment. In fact, sometimes comments aren't needed if it's very descriptive. When I go to invoke it, I know that I'm getting a sum with two numbers. I'm getting an average. And what's average? Some calculation that dividing something by 2. I get it. So that's very clean to me and very good. All right, so we're going to talk about scope. Let's just take a little bit of a break there. Let's see if I have the lab already set up for you. I'll have to upload it, but let's take a look at it. I will upload it momentarily if it's not up there. So we're going to do a lab on JavaScript functions. Please create separate files. Yes, try to create some separate files. It's better for your debugging than having it all in the same file. Exercise 1, create an HTML page. Have a script tag. So it's okay if you do inline for this example. Hello world, your first function, invoke it. Figure that out. It should be very straightforward after those examples, I hope. That's your first one. Second one would be create a script tag, have something called display message with one variable, one parameter called message. The conditional statement to test the following. Test the value of the so you're going to do a conditional statement that we learned. You're going to test some of those values coming into the parameters. If it's null, output message is null. If it's empty string, check that it's empty string. Otherwise, if the message is neither one of those, then console log what the message actually is. So as you can see in the output, I have something called message is null, message is empty. False doesn't meet those conditions. I'm outputting it. I'm also outputting a couple strings, and I'm sure if I had some numbers or some other type of objects that it would also output them, because they neither satisfy the null case or the empty string case. So that's a way of creating a function with some logic inside of it, and then you need to invoke it. And we talked about how you would invoke something. That's exercise 2. All right, I'll demo some of these other ones, but really with this in a bit once you start looking at them. So exercise 3, and 4 is a little harder, but exercise 3, create a page. Now we're going to actually link the script externally, and we're going to reuse that function from exercise 2. We're going to get some. There's no point in rewriting it again unless you want to. So you're going to have a function sitting around called display message, and you're going to create a function called prompt user. That's going to use that web API to prompt, and I gave the web docs on that. And then you get the message. Use the result of that prompt to display it to the console. So whatever I type in there, I would expect you call the other function, display message. So if we haven't been actually done that before, so you could actually, okay, you could actually call functions from within functions. So if you had a function called total, right? Total. And I had 2 numbers in the total, right? I could actually call another function from inside of this, right? I could actually say add x and y. I could just do this, okay? I could just say, all right, this is the sum. This is the sum, not to confuse you even more. I could say this is the sum, and I'm just going to return this result like this. Return result. I could do that, and I could invoke it from the outside like this. I could actually alert sum is equal to 10 and 10 should give me 10 and 10 should give me 20, right? So let's do it. I'll get rid of this. It should, if I spelt it right, 20, right? So I can invoke a function from within another function. I can have a container trigger another. I can have a building block trigger another building block, as many as I want. I can nest these things. It gets yeah, it gets interesting. It gets very interesting. That is number 3. Sorry, I'll upload that. I'll upload that in a minute. Yes, I will post a lab. So let's take a break and let's go to 7:45, half-hour break to get into this. I will post it up within the next minute. I'll message when it's up in this channel, then have your break, and then we'll come back at 7:45. Continue on with scope. Thank you.